Coal is the dominant means of generating electricity in the United States. One of my viewers sent this comment on our live stream last night, and I'm here to give you guys the truth about electricity generation in this country. Welcome to the DIY Off-Grid channel, where we explore topics related to energy and off-grid living. I am your host, Rancher Pete, and today we're going to zoom out of our usual focus on off-grid systems to take a broader look at the United States power grid. We're going to explore the composition of electricity generation sources in this country, the rapid growth of renewables like wind and solar, and how the shift is impacting the grid, energy costs, and decarbonization efforts. Even if you're off-grid, understanding these trends can help you make informed decisions about your energy choices. So let's dive into how America generates its electricity and the exciting trajectory of clean energy adoption. As someone who spends quite a lot of time looking at energy policies and trends throughout the world, it's rather interesting to see how quickly the energy landscape is changing with the rise in renewable energy. 1988 was the peak year for coal in the United States at around 57%. And right up to 2008, coal alone made up 50% of all the electricity generation in this country. 1988 was coincidentally the year natural gas made up the smallest proportion of electricity generation since the Energy Information Agency started keeping records in 1949 at just 9.3%. Post-2008, we had some significant shifts in the fossil fuel world, with coal declining rapidly, only to be offset by the use of natural gas. Why, you may ask? Right around that time is when fracking really took off, which enabled access to abundant natural gas in unconventional oil sources. After peaking at a little over $13 per million BTUs in July of 2008, natural gas prices at the Henry Hub has since averaged just $3 per million BTUs since, making it rather difficult for coal to be competitive with natural gas in producing electricity. Other factors include the fact that natural gas turbines are quite a bit more efficient than coal steam turbines, with the latest data from the EIA showing 10,745 BTUs to produce 1 kilowatt hour of electricity with coal, and just 7,721 BTUs to produce the same amount of electricity with natural gas. Fast forward to 2024, coal's proportion of the electricity generation in this country is expected to be right around 16% and declining. There are monthly variations in power output from various sources, and earlier this year, coal made up just 12.2% in March. On the other hand, natural gas made up 42% for the whole of 2023 and expected to be more or less the same for this year. I anticipate coal will continue to be phased out for power production in this country simply because it's not competitive with natural gas. To meet EPA regulations regarding air pollution, coal plants will slowly be closed down one by one. Installing scrubbers and adding carbon capture and sequestration to coal plants and attempting to safely store fly ash all but make it impossible for coal to be competitive in the long run, despite the abundance of coal in this country. One really mind-boggling fact is the uranium release from coal power plants into the Earth's atmosphere from burning the coal can produce more electricity than the coal itself. Now, besides those two sources, the next biggest chunk of our electricity comes from nuclear power plants. Since the Three Mile Island incident back in 1979, pretty much it halted all the nuclear power plant construction in this country until very recently. Nuclear power plants have consistently made up about 20% of the makeup of electricity generation in this country after those power plants were completed for the past 36 years or so. Now, I've always been a fan of nuclear energy, and we talk about nuclear power in depth during our live streams, but unfortunately we have a huge problem with keeping project construction costs under control in this country, and all sorts of environmental red tape that just make nuclear power really challenging. Now, let's get into renewables. Historically, the biggest contributor of renewable energy was hydroelectric power plants. In fact, 1949, when EIA first kept national records, hydro made up over 30% of all the electricity generation in this country. Since 1997, hydro's makeup has been consistently under 10%, making up just 6.1% last year. With all the droughts we're constantly experiencing in the western states and and no new hydroelectric power plants under consideration due to the tremendous environmental stress they place in the waterways that they're installed in, it's fair to say it's essentially a dead end for hydro's development here in the United States. I won't go into petroleum, wood, biomass, or geothermal because none of those make up more than 0.5% of the national electricity generation proportion as of last year. Finally, let's get into solar and wind now. Wind made up less than 1% as of 2007, and solar made up less than 1% in 2016. Since then, they've both been growing rapidly to the point wind made up 11%, and solar is expected to hit 5% this year. From a mere drop in the bucket 17 years ago to making up 16% this year. So far, the tally shows wind plus solar has exceeded coal's proportion for the whole of 2024. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that certainly doesn't sound like coal has any dominance. So where do we go from here with our energy makeup in this country? Now, natural gas will continue to work in lockstep with the deployment of renewables because of its ability to ramp up and down quickly to displace the intermittency of solar and wind. That's exactly what happened during the rapid adoption of renewables in California. It came with the development and the deployment of numerous natural gas peaker plants. The problem is peaker plants are very costly to operate versus baseload generation plants that produce a consistent amount of electricity around the clock. And once renewables make up a big enough proportion of a state's electricity makeup, it requires investment in batteries for energy storage. Otherwise, solar and wind power plants have to be idled when supply exceeds demand. Now, this is already happening in California, where several gigawatt hours of batteries have been deployed. Solar deployment is rapidly increasing simply because of its low cost throughout the country. We're seeing massive deployments even in northern states where solar wouldn't have even been considered a few years ago. Now, the cost of solar per watt has dropped far more quicker than wind has. So despite wind's head start, solar is growing much more rapidly, with EIA projecting growth of 75% between 2023 to 2025 for solar versus just 11% growth for wind in the same period. Within the next 3 to 5 years, solar is expected to outproduce wind energy in the United States, with the combined duo expected to surpass nuclear energy before the end of the decade. It's safe to say that renewables are here to stay. Solar and wind have a lower cost to produce 1 kilowatt hour of electricity than any other source out there, including all fossil fuels, hydro, and nuclear power plants. Support for renewable energy shouldn't be a matter of political affiliation, whether you support the left or the right, Democrat or Republican. If you really care about diversifying our energy supply in this country, reducing the cost and having more energy security here, we should be making every possible effort to hasten the pace of adopting these technologies. At the end of the day, fossil fuel, there is a finite supply. Now, we can try to keep up with exploration and improve our techniques to extract more of it, but it'll come at a higher cost, whereas renewables are only getting cheaper and cheaper. The US energy landscape is at a tipping point, with wind and solar leading the charge towards a cleaner, cheaper, and more sustainable grid. Whether you're tied to the grid or living off of it, these advancements are reshaping the way we think about energy. If you enjoyed this session and want to see if it makes sense for you to invest in solar and batteries for your own home, do sign up for it by filling out our form at allthingsoffgrid.com. You'll get a detailed report to determine whether the returns are worthwhile for you. Thanks for tuning in to the DIY Off-Grid channel, guys. Tap that like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends, family, and community. Have a topic you want us to explore, feel free to comment or message me as always. Until next time, guys, power your independence and stay sustainable.